everyone. Welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
I'm your co-host, Mike.
We're here at episode 250 this week,
We
Mike.
made it.
Yeah.
Yeah, how about that?
250 regular episodes. There's 8 interviews in there, a few guest host episodes mixed in on the way. We're just charging on more and more every week, Mike.
Right, and it's just not going to stop soon. Except that we are going to be taking a break one week coming up, right?
Yeah, after next week, we'll take a week off.
Next week we'll have an episode, though.
Yeah, next week will be a regular episode. We don't have any deaths this week, Mike. No other news or things to report. There's enough bad news out in the world this week.
But in music, it's all good news. Records are still coming out, thankfully. I'm always happy about that.
That's right. So we're just going to jump in and take your mind off the rest of the things in your life and bring you some great new classical and jazz music. As always, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the recordings we're going to talk about. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. If you can't see the full description or if the recording list and links are hard to access wherever you're listening to us now, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, podbean.com. Everything's easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you enjoy listening to us. Tell a music-loving friend as well. Help us grow our audience. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review wherever you listen to us, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, and that helps us reach more people as well. Come and follow us on our Facebook page to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. I put up a few new jazz releases from last Friday there. You can leave a message or comment there as well. Check us out on X too. We're Adult Music Pod over there. I post links to the new episodes on X as well. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. As part of our discussion, we will play music samples, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. We also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And this week we're going to start out with something that should be familiar to us because we heard one of these works not too long ago.
Yeah, and in fact, I got a big setup for this, so I'm glad we're going into it right away. All right, now, the album is called Orlando di Lasso and Lodovico Agostini. Those are your two composers, Lagrime di San Pietro. Okay, and this is by an ensemble that we both really like, Doulce, Mémoire, conducted by Denis, Raisin, Dadre. Now, the recently deceased Denis, Raisin, Dadre.
Right.
He died last year, September 29th, 2025. And this recording was made in January 2025 at Noirlac Abbey in France, 8 months before Raisin Dadre died. So it's his last recording, I guess, with them. They are going to go on, though, without him. Let me introduce the ensemble. Camille Fritsch, mezzo-soprano. Bryce Clavier Homburg, alto, or countertenor, I guess you'd say. Olivier Coiffet, also a countertenor. François Olivier Jean is the tenor. Mathieu Lelevreux, baritone, and Guillaume Olry, bass. And then there are instrumentalists, too. Eva Godard, cornet, and cornetto muto. Sarah Dubusse, cornet, cornetto muto. Johan Maitre, tenor dulcian and recorder. Ooh. Elsa Frank, bassanello, a new instrument for me. Tenor dulcian and recorder. Jérémy Papasergio, bass dulcian and recorder. Adrien Reboisson, alto dulcian and recorder, and Rémi Lecorchet, sackbut and recorder. Boy, just have a sackbut lying around the house. You could really do a lot of damage, I think, to people's ears. Anyway.
Chase those cats away.
Not on this recording, though. Let me explain, first of all. A cornet, C-O-R-N-E-T-T, or in Italian you'd say cornetto, is a lip reed wind instrument, and they're usually curved. The mute cornet is made from a single piece of wood. That's what's different about it than a regular cornet. It's more flute-like than the regular cornet. A dulcian is a predecessor to the modern bassoon, and a bassanello is a Renaissance double reed woodwind instrument and looks a bit like an early bassoon. and a sackbut is an early form of the trombone. Elsa Frank, oboist and flutist, and Jérémy Papasergio, flutist and bassoonists, who are both playing dulcians and recorders on this album, are the two members who will guide Doulce Mémoire into the post-Denis Raisin Dadre future. They were close collaborators with Raisin Dadre, and the album is dedicated to his memory. Fittingly, both the Lasso and Agostini works on the album also happen to be the last composition of each composer, and they're both on the same subject, more or less. The movements from both of the main works programmed on this album deal with, well, the Lasso one deals with Peter's denial of Jesus, a subject rarely encountered in musical settings, and really the Agostini work deals with penitence. Orlando de Lasso took Renaissance counterpoint and musical rhetoric to their apogee in Lagrime de San Pietro, and Ludovico Agostini brought into play all the already Baroque devices of a chromaticism and dissonance with the aim of deeply moving the listener. Presenting these two works side by side highlights their differences, the restraint and interiority of the Lagrime de San Pietro, and the expressiveness and effusion of Le Lagrime del Peccatore. And really, that contrast is really what makes this album very interesting.
Yeah, and it's helped out by the program here.
Yeah, Lasso wrote Lagrime di San Pietro as a form of penitence for his errant youth. Russ and I could both do the same thing, couldn't we all, listeners?
I've forgotten most of those things.
Yeah, all of our youths were errant, were they not? The texts are by Luigi Tansillo, who Lasso had probably become acquainted with in his youth when both were in Naples. When Tansillo died in 1568, the poem was still unfinished, but comprised over 900 stanzas. Boy, wow. This guy just didn't know when to stop. The incomplete edition Lasso drew his text from had only 42 stanzas, and he used 20 of them for his composition. Boy, he must have gotten hold of it early on. He also added a Latin motet, Vide Homo, which we'll hear at the end. His full work has 21 sections, and on this album we hear 7 of them, plus the ending motet. So it's 8 in total. This is the first recording of Ludovico Agostini's Lagrime del Peccatore. A peccatore is a sinner. Agostini's work, like Lasso's, also has 21 sections. We hear 10 of them on this recording. Agostini did not take his text from Tansillo's work, but collected it from various sources. Many of those sources unknown, but a few have been identified as the work of 2 poets from Ferrara, Giovanni Battista Guarini and Bernardo Tasso. Agostini may have written some of the text himself, and rather than focusing solely on the figure of Peter, Agostini presents a meditation on suffering, repentance, and hope. Lasso's work uses a 7-voice setting. The number 7 was always associated at that time with suffering and mourning. You know, the 7 sorrows of Mary, that sort of thing. The 7-part writing enables dialogue effects between a high trio and a low quartet, as well as all other kinds of combinations. Agostini composed his work more traditionally for 6 voices, and he goes more for dramatic effect and compositional virtuosity, which is displayed in Lasso. So we get a lot of contrast again. One of the things this recording does is bring out the strict counterpoint and superb emotional restraint of Lasso's work by contrasting it with the unrestrained expression of feeling that we witness in Agostini's Lagrime. All right, now, I should mention, we just heard other excerpts, and probably some of the same ones, of Lasso's Lagrime di San Pietro only a few weeks ago.
Right.
In Il Giardino Armonico's recording of Carissimi's Jonah on our January 19th, 2026 episode 243, Quartets Aligned, where the Lasso work was programmed as the last work on the album, and I made a joke about how the author of the poem, Luigi Tansillo, really beats up on poor St. Peter for denying Jesus 3 times. But we don't get the sense of the constant abuse that this set of verses heap on St. Peter on this album. Thankfully, since we only hear 7 sections of the Lasso work, and they're interspersed with sections of the Agostini work. All right, so this is going to be a little more of a less severe program, let's say. All right, let's start with Orlando di Lasso. We're going to start with an instrumental, Deficiat Indolore. Right away, the first thing we hear on this album is instruments, and I really love the sound of the opening harmony on the antique brass or reed instruments here. Ooh, some spicy harmonies in passing there. Really great, and we really hear them all very clearly. The music carries a lot of dolore. Indeed, dolore is suffering. It's got a droopy, sad-sounding harmony and timbre to it, so we're prepped for the texts we're going to hear sung. Beautiful harmony by Lasso throughout in this piece. The performances have a light vulnerability to them in the way certain tones take on a sensitivity when peeking through the texture. Listen closely for those, here and throughout the album, really. Track 2 is an anonymous composition for Laudes, Al pie del duro sasso. Denis Raisin Dadre wrote in the booklet notes that he felt something representing the voice of ordinary people was needed to open and close the program. So he starts here with an Italian lauda, a type of popular religious music sung by the laity in contexts outside that of the church. Simple, unaffected music without any of the artifice and subtlety of the spiritual madrigal. The text here is about Mary Magdalene, saddened that she cannot find her master's body at the tomb. The text is sung in unison harmony like a chant. It's our first listen to the vocalists on the album, here all blending together. The text is gone through straight with no melisma, one note per syllable. Music like this has a way of removing a layer or two of stress, I notice. At 1 minute and 22 seconds, we hear harmony as the voices thin in texture, but take on more interest with their kind of harmonized melody. It's another vulnerable moment that I really enjoyed. Let's sample that moment. At 2 minutes and 25 seconds, the harmony fills out with even more voices. Beautiful sound on this recording, allowing you to hear all of the instrumental voices. With the repeat of the first stanza, the music returns to unison harmony. It's a moving track and very beautiful in execution and sound quality. Tracks 3 and 4 are from Orlando di Lasso's Lagrime di San Pietro, or Tears of St. Peter. This was composed in 1594 at the end of Lasso's life. As we said, it's his last composition. Track 3, Il Magnanimo Pietro, this comes in with full textured vocals and brass accompaniment, followed by voices in harmony, and sounding like it's doubling some of the voices. Listen to this. This really, you're in the hands of a master here as far as harmony goes. The individual voices come through due to their unique individual qualities. This is one of the qualities that I love about this ensemble. The performance sounds heartfelt and personal, and the quality of the counterpoint is clearly projected. Track 4, Magliarchi che nel petto. This section starts more slowly and floats a bit in vocal quality. The brass are gone here, giving the performance a more personal, intimate sound. And this is part of the magic of this album. We heard the thicker texture that the brass instruments bring, and now suddenly they're gone, and we have like more sort of air in the piece, a little more space, and it's really a unique effect. those wonderful interweaving lines of Orlando di Lasso. And again here, the performance is sensitive enough and the performer's nuanced and spaced enough that the individual syllables are easily discernible. Also, each of the voices in this ensemble has its own unique quality. They were assembled more for their individuality, I think, more for their ability to blend. And they do blend very, very well. But you can pick out each strand because of their individual timbres. It's really wonderful. Okay, tracks 5 through 6, we have our other composer on the album, Lodovico Agostini, Le Lagrime del Peccatore. This was composed in 1586, and as I mentioned earlier, was also Agostini's last work. Track 5 is called Vergine se pietate. The harmony here is noticeably different than in the Lasso work, stacked in a more chord-like way, though counterpoint does emerge. The setting moves more slowly through the text, and once again, the individual vocal timbres are enticing. Listen for those. Try to pull out all of the individual strands. It's really great sound. The text is a prayer to the Virgin Mary to petition God for forgiveness. At 2 minutes and 14 seconds, there's a full pause, and a new section starts on the last line of text. There's a pretty compelling dissonance just before the final chord at around the 3 minute and 5 second mark. Listen for that. In fact, you won't have to listen for it. You'll definitely hear it. Track 6, Le Lagrime, I Sospiri. The track starts with individual voices entering and slowly stacking up. I'm looking at how many tracks are on this album, and I'm going to have to start sampling with a bit more economy from this point on. So I'm going to send you to hear this magically hushed track yourself. There are once again some compelling passing dissonances that are supposed to pull emotion out of the text. So let's keep that in mind with our modern ears that might not interpret these sounds as emotion. The text is a statement that Jesus died so that the writer or singer will not fall into the dark depths of Tartarus or hell. The track does a gradual crescendo throughout, ending on a forte. So it's better to sample this yourself so you can hear that gradual crescendo. Tracks 7 through 9, Orlando di Lasso, Lagrime di San Pietro. We get back to the Lasso work here. Track 7, Tre volte Haveva. The ancient brass are back. I keep calling them brass. They're really wind instruments, and there's one or two brass instruments in there too. They're back to accompany the voices here. Let's hear how they sound together. The text is sad, saying that Peter denied he was Jesus' servant 3 times. The lines here are spare and exposed, even with the brass accompanying, sounding like a hand on the singer's shoulders, reassuring them. I like the tight harmony given to the brass at around the 1 minute and 45 second mark. There's a great swelling crescendo right at the end, then a detour to a non-resolving harmony. Very interesting. Track 8, Quala l'incontro. This is sung a cappella. The effect of hearing only voices after a track that featured wind instruments is interesting, as though scaffolding has been pulled away and the voices magically sustain themselves where they are in midair. You'll have to hear both tracks in their entirety to see what I mean, so I'll recommend you sample tracks 7 and 8 together. Clean-sounding harmony is heard throughout the movement, sung with a bit of a hush to it. Track 9, Queste Opere. This starts with the lower voices singing a harmony, and that harmony is then stacked up by the other sections of the ensemble. There's a smooth quality to the harmonic intervals, and the whole thing sounds like the melody is being spread creamily across the space, sort of like peanut butter. Or, maybe mayonnaise, too. I don't know. Beautiful harmony throughout the piece, and I'm going to make you sample it yourself. Okay, a composer we haven't sampled enough of yet on this album, Lodovico Agostini, back to Le Lagrime del Peccatore. Track 10 is called La Morte è Morta, Death is Dead. This track is about how death is defeated by Jesus' death. It starts with a hush in the low voices, which produce a harmonic shimmer. The women are in there too, singing lower in their range, but they come more to the surface as the movement goes on. Listen to the harmony here, about 2 minutes and 45 seconds into the movement. Not giving us that cadence there, really nice extending of the melodic and harmonic lines. Track 11, La Vita è Breve. Oh, isn't it though? Life is short. This text is a wish that Jesus will grant the life of life, which is Jesus himself. It starts relatively boldly with a curving brief line that eventually builds into more straightforward flowing harmonies and counterpoint. Track 12, Svegliati o mai, starts with the high sopranos, and the entries come in from gradually lower voices. I love the way this starts. Let's hear it. Yeah, put headphones on for that so that you can hear the entry of all of the voices. It's really magical. The winds, as you heard, are in for this movement, filling in harmony and other voice parts. The text implores the listener to raise your eyes toward God, for he will dispel the dense and dismal fog in which you've been enveloped. It's a fairly cheerful piece as far as harmony goes. There's a pause before the last two lines of the second stanza. Track 13, Chiudi gli orecchi, means close your ears. I don't know how you would do that, I guess with your hands. This starts with the brass playing a single chord with many attacks in a rhythm. The voices come in counterpoint. The movement is called Close Your Ears and goes on to tell the listener to close your ears to the sweet song of false sirens. I'm guessing the winds here would represent the song of the sirens. Can you imagine putting out an album called Close Your Ears? I mean, aren't you sort of defeating yourself there? I don't know. If you're a musician. Anyway, tracks 14 through 15, back to Orlando di Lasso, Lagrime di San Pietro. Track 14 is called Come falda di neve, or like a snowflake. This starts mournfully with gorgeous, spacious harmony and a hush to the overall tone. The women start, and then the men come in for the contrapuntal lines. The women and men trade the lead throughout until the words "tutta si sface," or everything melts away. There are some beautiful solo lines exposed at points in the text. This is a gorgeous performance of a gorgeous work. Track 15, Quel Volto, or That Face. This piece starts sparely as well. The brass are in and play with a bit of subtlety here, blending with the voices until they come in force. The effect when the brass stops and the voices are exposed in their higher timbres is magical. Give this a listen in full. In the text, Jesus looks at Peter, and Peter's fear turns to shame. There's some characterful singing after the 2-minute mark on the word vergogna, or shame. Listen to it. I like the emotion put in here. Track 16, Orlando di Lasso, Chi ad una. This is an instrumental track. The winds get another solo track and play in solid chord style here, and I sampled them at the beginning, so I'll send you to hear this one on your own too. The work acts as a bit of an interlude between the vocal tracks and is a nice bit of programming. Tracks 17 through 20, Lodovico Agostini, Le Lagrime del Peccatore. Track 17, L'anima mia, signore. A solo female voice starts the movement, and the rest soon follow. There are some odd swerves to both the melodic line and the harmony in this piece. It's pretty interesting. Let's hear a bit of it. The piece has a pleasant way of flowing from section to section and landing on new harmonies. The text reads that the soul of the singer, which God created, is now unworthy of God, and the singer pleads for healing. Track 18, Or che il ciel e la terra. The tempo here is slow, and the voices sound quietly, suspended in air, without much support in the bass end. It's an enchanting opening that I think I'll have to send you to hear on your own. At the 1-minute mark, the flow of the harmony briefly acquires a staccato rhythm, surprising for a moment. Then the harmony comes back in, legato, and thickly harmonized. Track 19, La morte de colui, The Death of Him. I like the dipping melody that we hear right at the beginning, imitated by the entry of the other voices, who come in more thickly afterwards. And that one I really want to keep listening to. The piece continues in a slowly flowing manner with much the same sound, and it's intriguing to hear the voices that appear out of the texture. Track 20, La Croce Già Fu. This work starts in a similar fashion to the previous track, with a downward moving interval that's imitated in the other voices. The harmony here, clearly articulated, has a sort of flowing like molasses feel to it, as it smoothly and thickly reshapes into new harmonies. Track 21, we hear the final movement of the Orlando di Lasso piece, Lagrime di San Pietro. This is Vide Omo. The final movement of Lagrime di San Pietro, this was not written by the poet Luigi Tansillo. The text comes from a Latin motet in which Jesus tells us what he suffered for us, and he's rather scolding us for not showing gratitude. The music moves slowly here and features some glowing harmonies from Lasso, beautifully executed by the ensemble. And then track 22, the final track, is by an anonymous Composer, it's a Lauda o Sacro Santo Legno, sacred holy wood, meaning the wood of the cross. We end with another chant of the people, this one praying for the Holy Cross. It starts in unison harmony with only male voices, sounding like monks here. Harmony eventually comes in at around the 1 minute mark, but it's lower male voices only. The women's voices are finally in at around the 3 minute mark of this 4 minute piece, adding some new color. There's harmony here that continues to the end only with a hush, as though the ensemble is leaving the church as they sing. The end of a beautiful album and a fitting tribute to its director, Denis Raisin Dadre. The album is a potent reminder of what's so special about Doulce Mémoire. It's the ability for their voices, which all have very individual sounding timbres, to blend together in a gorgeous harmony that can nevertheless be separated out by the listener's ear due to those individual timbres. And to the amazingly clear and spacious recording, so I want to give a shout out to the sound engineer who's not specifically mentioned in the book, unless it's part of the responsibility of recording producer, editor, and masterer Jean-Marc Lesnay. He's the only technical person mentioned. So anyway, he did excellent work on this album too. The program is creative, as we've come to expect from this ensemble. The entire program of works by Agostini and Lasso flows beautifully from beginning to end, and the works sort of interweave with each other in an appealing way. The use of the period winds and brass bring extra character to the work. For me, it was actually when those wind instruments dropped out of the recording suddenly that produced the most magical moments, when you heard all that thickness of texture and then suddenly it wasn't there. The creative layout of the program is something that I hope will continue, with Elsa Frank and Jérémy Papasergio taking over directorial responsibilities for Doulce Mémoire now that Denis Raisin Dadre is gone. One thing's for sure, these voices will continue to enchant.
Since we heard the Lasso work not so long ago, it was still kind of fresh in my memory, and that made it easier to compare with the Agostini work. As the album notes point out, Lasso's writing is perhaps more sophisticated in counterpoint. The harmonies really induce a calming, meditative mood on the listener. The Agostini is interesting, though, in its more chromatic lines and dissonances. The lyrical differences are interesting, too, but the content is quite heavy, not so much in the selections here as the last time we heard parts of this work, but I found myself wanting to focus more on the music than all of the sorrow in the lyrics.
Well, it is Lent, so I guess we should be thinking about those things.
I guess. The Agostini was composed in 1586, and this is the first recording. It's amazing to think about. I enjoyed the cornetto and instrumental content as well, and in the recording, the sense of distance of the recorded vocals adds to the atmosphere, and I found that drawing me into the music deeper.
Okay, let's move on to some orchestral music, something very familiar to classical music listeners. Mendelssohn's, this is Felix Mendelssohn's, Symphony No. 3, the Scottish Symphony. I remember when I was a child, it was always called the Scotch Symphony. I guess that's become associated with whiskey now, so they call it the Scottish Symphony.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, and then the Hebrides Overture, which also has a Scottish theme to it. This is performed by Les Ambassadeurs La Grande Écurie, conducted by Alexis Kossenko, and this is on the Aparté label, released on February 20th. Now, the ensemble has two names held together by a dash because it represents the merger of two early music ensembles.
Oh.
After 2018, it was Alexis Kossenko himself who brought the ensembles together, and now they perform under that hybrid name. It's kind of an odd name, but I guess if you were a fan of either one of these now, you kind of know that they're together. The booklet notes are in the form of an interview with the conductor Alexis Kossenko, and as you can imagine, he's very enthusiastic about the recording project. These are two very often played and well-known works, but the recording here focuses on the very little-known early versions of both works. And what's nice about the Scottish Symphony is that it's longer than the version that we've come to know as the most popular one. It's also the first ever recording on period instruments of these two works, so we're really sort of hearing something new here. The two works are inspired by Scotland, so it's fitting that they're programmed together. That's another thing. These two works are rarely paired together. Why not?
Yeah.
They both have that Scottish theme. Both works have their roots in Mendelssohn's trip to England and Scotland in 1829, a trip that made a lasting impression on him. He started the work during his trip and then put it aside during an 1830 trip to Italy and came back to it 10 years later in 1841. And as we know, that 1830 trip to Italy gave us the Italian Symphony, his Symphony No. 4. I kind of like this idea that the Romantics had. Franz Liszt did it too, where they'd go somewhere and instead of like writing in their diary, oh, this was nice, although they did that too, they would write music about it. I'd like to encourage modern composers to do the same, or even modern songwriters. Why not? Tracks 1 through 4, Symphony No. 3, Scottish, Opus 56, MWVN 18, London version from 1842. The first movement has an introduction, that's Andante con moto, and the main section is Allegro un poco agitato. The opening is noble and quasi-monolithic and was inspired by Mendelssohn's visit to Holyrood Palace, the palace of Mary Queen of Scots. Or rather, it's overgrown ruins. There was no actual palace there. The rest of the movement, Kossenko believes, is a depiction of the sea. Now, I don't really agree with this, but we'll get to that. But what's important is he thinks it is, and that's how he conducts it. The flow of the opening is appealing. This is a long movement in general, but this version goes on longer than the more familiar version we generally hear, reaching over 15 minutes. More flowing music is heard at around the 2-minute mark, and the period instruments bring a more matte finish to the sound, which is intriguing me here. It's like hearing the piece for the first time. All right, I'm going to give you the introduction. This would be this is the first part of the work that Mendelssohn actually wrote down, and it's inspired by his visit to Holyrood Palace, Mary Queen of Scots Palace in Scotland. One thing I love about Romantic era composers is they really take their time reaching those cadences, you know? They keep you in suspense. When's it going to come? Anyway, yeah, I guess that sounds pretty regal, I thought, at the opening there. At 3 minutes and 36 seconds, a more dance-like section begins. I hear this as a Scottish country dance. Now, Kossenko says he thinks it's the sea flowing. And yeah, it could be. But I don't know, I kind of hear the dance quality of this and the sort of pastoral quality in it as well. The woodwinds really come across with character in this period instrument version. There's a bit of a galloping section at around the 4 minute and 15 second mark. Fortes really crash out of the speakers without overwhelming the listener. Let's hear a bit of this. I'm going to take a really long sample of this part. Yeah, now to my ear, that winding down of that last melody has kind of a bagpipe quality to it, or a rather lighter sound, but it's got something like that. So I hear this as more of a song and dance. The dance and gallop section are back after this sample in what sounds like a repeat of the opening of the main part of the movement. At 9 minutes and 27 seconds, we're really into the development section, which starts more mournfully, featuring strings and brass. with winds blending in. The brass have an edge on this recording. By minute 11, we're hearing material from the end of the exposition, but juxtaposed with other music from that section. At 11 minutes and 55 seconds, we land squarely back into the dancing first theme of the exposition. There's some good tension building here as we get to the unwinding cadence material. At 13 minutes and 42 seconds, we go into a mournful coda, starting with the opening of the development, though this time there are rhythmic and harmonic stirrings building the piece up to a climax. The strings produce winds at sea effects as a storm seems to be building after the 14 minute and 30 second mark, so maybe Kossenko is thinking about this section as the watery section. There's a muffled quality to the timpani so that they don't explode out like a modern instrument ensemble would, but I'd say that's a good thing. I really liked the effect. Balance is easily maintained here. Once the coda reaches its climax, we return to the Holyrood Castle from the movement's introduction and end in a stately manner. Track 2, Scherzo vivace non troppo. This is given a lively rhythm and the brass really play out here. I wanted to get that last phrase in so you could hear how the brass stick out there. I also love the way those wind notes sustain into the return of the melody. Normally the conductor would focus on the melody, but he just leaves that sort of wind tone hanging in the air. Nice effect there. This does sound watery to my ear. The swirling of the strings evoke agitated streams. The actual theme is folk-like and sounds more so at the forte at around the 52nd mark, which we heard at the end of that sample. There's a straighter middle section played by the strings with twittering winds coming in eventually. I have to directly sample the winds at one point, so let's do it here. We heard a bit of them at the beginning, I know, but I want to hear this too. Very impressive, crisp articulation by the winds in that very fast section. Later, we're back to the opening theme, and I love the way the brass stick out when they briefly come in on their own. Beautiful repeated notes on the winds at the 4-minute mark just before the ending. Track 3 is the third movement, Adagio. Strings lead here too, handing off phrase endings to the brass. At 32 seconds, the main melody starts, with sustained brass providing a lot of harmonic voicing. A somber march theme is heard at around the 2-minute and 10-second mark with a funereal feel to it. It's then played out fortissimo at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I'm noticing here how dry this recording is. The already unburnished sounding instruments die out quickly in the acoustic. Phrasing is so well played, though, that no blemishes are heard in the playing. I like the return of the opening theme, with arabesques accompanying in the violins at around the 4-minute and 30-second mark. After the 6-minute mark, the opening returns again, and this time heads to its final cadence. Track 4, the fourth movement, Finale Guerriero, Allegro vivacissimo, moving to Allegro maestoso assai. No pause going into this movement. I like the quarter note repeating chords, the winds set underneath the melody. Listen. And we're off to a new theme there. The swashbuckling quality of the music in this movement is well shaped but rather held back energetically. It still registers well in detail. It could have something to do with keeping all of the period instruments sounding clear. At the 2-minute and 50-second mark, after a cadence, the main theme returns, and we get a repeat of the section up to 4 minutes and 26 seconds, where we dip into a development section. At 4 minutes and 50 seconds, we're quickly back to the main theme and some development off of that as keys change and tension builds. There's a bit of a stuck chord just around the 6-minute mark, before and after it, recalling Beethoven. He does something similar in the Eroica Symphony. The music calms at 6 minutes and 50 seconds, and the winds play earlier material. At 7 minutes and 44 seconds, a rough-hewn country dance emerges in the low winds and strings. Brass brings some majestic shine to it at 8 minutes and 20 seconds. And we head to the end from there. The theme is new, but drawn from previous phrases in the symphony and provides material for a rousing ending. Track 5 is the Hebrides Overture, probably my favorite overture by Mendelssohn, and he's also got that wonderful Midsummer Night's Dream one, but I really love this one. This is Opus 26, MWV P7, the Rome version from 1830. While the Third Symphony is believed to have a program, the Hebrides Overture very clearly has one. The work is said to have been directly inspired by the emotional experience to the very impressive basalt cave known as Fingal's Cave on the small uninhabited island of Staffa in August 1829 when Mendelssohn was there. Mendelssohn, however, had sketched what were to be the opening bars of the overture before he had ever seen the cave. Mendelssohn completed the first version of the overture in Italy in December 1830 and played it for the first time on the piano for Hector Berlioz. Oh, who knew they knew each other? Which is why it's known as the Rome version. I like the brass and strings swirling at the opening as winds provide harmony. The strings take over that opening theme. I've always loved the transition to the next section and its low string-led theme. The whole texture changes, so let me sample that. Kossenko gets a good flow out of the ensemble in this overture. There's a palpable sense it's headed somewhere. Fanfares come just before the 3-minute mark, mostly in the strings. At the 4-minute mark, a signaling theme, which sounds military, is played, leading to different keys. At 5 minutes and 13 seconds, the previous section melts into a more pastoral section of melody that soon starts tightening and building tension. At 5 minutes and 50 seconds, we're back to the familiar material from the opening, but the key isn't established, and there's a move to other key areas. At 6 minutes and 20 seconds, a sort of cantering rhythm is heard in the strings as the winds punctuate. Finally, at 7 minutes and 30 seconds, the opening pattern in the strings is back, and the piece is back on familiar ground. The transition to the second theme is taken by a clarinet and is gently played in this version. It's a real surprise, and a happy surprise of this particular version of the score. The ending features the opening theme in more emphatic rhythm, leading to rushing approaches to the cadence, finally reached, after which pizzicati in the bass and a held flute note bring the score to an end. Well, this is an album that has soaked us in Mendelssohn's thoughts of Scotland. It's surprising that there haven't been more albums that have programmed these two works together, because they work extremely well on the same program. Les Ambassadeurs, La Grande, Écurie generally perform earlier music from the Baroque and classical eras, but here they come off well, not dazzling, but playing straight and exposing a lot of delights in the score, particularly among the woodwinds. I've always liked the way period instruments can highlight elements of a score that a contemporary instrument's slickness tends to obscure, though with the benefit of more powerful sound. Les Ambassadeurs, La Grande Écurie bring out all of the musicality of Mendelssohn's scores, and Alexis Kossenko's excitement at the project is palpable. The performances sacrifice a bit of drive for orchestral color, and the sounds kept me eager for more. The acoustic is pretty dry, but the ensemble acquits itself so well technically that you often forget how quickly notes die out. The period instruments and the rarity of the versions of these famous works are going to be the reason to listen to this album, and it was certainly an enjoyable voyage.
I've listened to this work before, but it's been quite a while, so I'd like to go back and compare it with other versions. I'm not that familiar with the differences that I can notice them right away. It's interesting that Mendelssohn was able to evoke a Scottish character in the music here without quoting any folk melodies or known themes. I guess he was that impressed by his visit. I also read that the symphony was to be performed without any space between the movements, and that's fitting because the work presents a continuous feel of excitement and suspense building even through the quieter and softer passages. Mendelssohn was really great at composing enchanting melodies, and they just keep coming along here. I found myself drawn into something new every minute or so in the work. I enjoyed the performance, and the big romantic brass sound comes through even with the drier period instruments. The tonal character of the whole recording is kind of unique, and as you say, I think you'll have to listen to it in comparison with a modern orchestra's performance of this version or a different version to really appreciate those tonal differences. It's something I may go back to when I have some time.
Yeah, but there aren't that many recordings of these particular versions of these works, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
All right, our contemporary composer of the week is Heinz Karl Gruber, who styles himself as H.K. Gruber. He was born in Vienna, Austria in 1943, and he really is Austrian to the bones. This recording is of his piano concerto, his work Short Stories from the Vienna Woods, and another work, Castles in the Air. The recording features Frank Dupree on the piano. We've heard him before playing Kapustin piano concertos, very different works than we're going to hear here. We also have the ORF Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra conducted by the composer himself, H.K. Gruber. This is on the Capriccio label, released on February 6th. H.K. Gruber is a multifaceted talent. He's a composer, conductor, instrumentalist, singer, chansonnier, and political cultural activist. Vienna plays a key role in his identity. It's the vanishing point towards which everything in his biography converges and from which everything moves away. You know, we really can't say that of ourselves here in Kyoto, can we, Russ? This release features excellently detailed and highly entertaining booklet notes which I will quote from freely, and if this is something that's going to appeal to you, you'll definitely want to read the booklet notes before or while listening to the album. Track 1, Concerto for Piano and Orchestra, composed 2014 to 2016. The idea for this piano concerto arose in 2007 during a meeting between Emanuel Ax and H.K. Gruber in Vienna, but realization came only between 2014 and 2016 as a joint commission from the New York, Stockholm, and Berlin Philharmonics, plus the Tonhalle Zurich, following completion of Tales from the Vienna Woods, with which the piano concerto is intimately linked. The work was premiered on January 5, 2017, with Emanuel Ax and the New York Philharmonic under Alan Gilbert at Lincoln Center. The kernel of the work lies in a scene from the beginning of the opera's third act, the encounter between the sorcerer King and his daughter Marianne in the nightclub Maxime's. We'll talk more about that in the next work. With Brechtian Weilean sharpness, the double standards and misogyny of a patriarchal society are exposed, one that lustfully commodifies women's bodies while simultaneously despising them for it. It's the stage music accompanying the father-daughter conversation, a shimmy, that provides the concerto's starting point. The piano increasingly emancipates itself from its original role, first paraphrasing and diminishing the melodic material, finally dissolving entirely into its role as virtuoso solo instrument in kaleidoscopic interplay with the orchestra. The work has something akin to an overarching three-part structure, and it's presented in a single movement here in a single track. Now the piece starts with quirky winds playing over a steady 4/4 repeating chord. There's then a pause and the material returns, this time with a right-hand piano line added. There's also a counter melody in the clarinet. During all of this adding on, a slow crescendo is occurring. It's hard to know where to sample, but let's pick this up once some material has accumulated to give you a feel of what this sounds like overall. We may as well come out of it there. A lot of silence is following. You heard that accent followed by a clarinet, I think, and that solo line starts a new section. The piano plays brief, schizophrenic figures over the melody. The concerto itself moves in a schizophrenic way, with unexpected sudden changes of sections to completely different approaches. Some quick figures emerge before the 5-minute mark, then the opening quarter note repeating chord returns, with material in the orchestra over it. The piano spends a lot of the middle of the concerto playing frenetic, angular lines as the orchestral material glacially unfolds over a longer time period. Let me give you a sample of the piano's line 8 minutes into the work. Now, one thing you'll notice is the density of orchestral timbre that's used in that section. That's going to be a big feature of Gruber's compositions throughout the album. At 9 minutes and 10 seconds, that quarter note chord is back in the piano. It seems to act as a guidepost to help us get our bearings. The orchestra then starts playing frenetic lines, and the piano joins in. This suddenly evaporates as the beginnings of melodic ideas seem to emerge, but the piano is always restless and continues its frenetic lines. At 10 minutes and 40 seconds, there's a sudden quietening for a brief atmospheric set of measures, but a crescendo quickly brings the music back to something more complicated, and the piano stands out playing chords. The opening chords are back at 12 minutes and 20 seconds for a calm section in which the piano builds a right-hand theme slowly. This ends in a pause, then a continuation in the piano. I rather like the slow section with light percussion tones at around the 14-minute mark, so let's sample that. Again, some of that uniquely colored or timbred orchestration is heard there. Of course, this gradually grows more agitated and we arrive at more frenetic activity in the piano. That seems to be the course of the concerto, order, moving into disorder, then resetting, and moving into disorder again. The pianist has a lot more time in the spotlight toward the end of the piece, playing lines that glitter a bit more toward the top of his range. There are subtle rhythmic changes in the material that add to the quirkiness, and really this has been the case from the beginning. The piano settles onto chord-based themes toward the end. If you listen in the background, there's all sorts of odd orchestration that appeals to more adventurous ears. A more solid set of rhythmic figures emerges as we head toward the end of the concerto, some with ostinato quality to them. The piece has an odd ending, sounding like the rhythm is slowing down as the piano makes one last lunge to play the final chord. It's an interesting work, to be sure. Tracks 2 through 8, short stories from the Vienna Woods, or symphonic scenes from the opera Tales from the Vienna Woods, which was composed in 2014. This piece, Short Stories from the Vienna Woods, was composed in 2019. Tales from the Vienna Woods was a play written by Audun van Horvath in the 1930s. Michael Sturminger fashioned the libretto from Horvath's play for Gruber's opera. It has fabulous orchestral invention and suggestive interludes, and it was only a matter of time before calls for a concert suite led to a joint commission by the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra and the Boston Symphony Orchestra and their conductor Andrus Nelsons. Due to the pandemic, the short stories from the Vienna Woods premiered only in incomplete four-movement form in Boston on January 6, 2022, under Nelsons' direction. The complete version followed on September 22, 2022, in Leipzig, conducted by Christian Masalaru. The movement titles are given in German and translated to English. I'm going to stick to the English translations here, so German listeners, please forgive me. Or maybe you're happy that you don't have to hear me speak German. Track 2, the first movement, Introduction and Song from the Wachau. Okay, this is based on the opera's opening scene. We're on the banks of the Danube on a summer evening where the protagonists are at a lively dinner party. In the opera, the song from the Wachau is initiated by Marianne, the daughter of the Sorcerer King. Now, the Sorcerer King is the proprietor of a puppet repair shop. And then the song is taken up by the ensemble and chorus. The muted trumpet takes the place of Marianne's voice here, while strings represent ensembles and chorus. The opening is pretty harsh and makes an immediate impression. Fantastic body on the percussion, by the way, on the recording. It really kind of hits the midsection. All of this quickly quietens into cheeky wind lines. There are a lot of quick changes. I should say the recording is pretty vivid, with the timpani registering in a high dimensionality. A mysterious, tranquil section emerges at around the 1 minute and 10-second mark with a still nighttime quality to it. The muted trumpet is heard up front at 2 minutes and 30 seconds and plays the song from the Wachau theme. It's melodic and gentle. A waltz in the strings with a breathy staccato flute above is heard at the end. Track 3, the second movement, Splintered Waltzes. Here, Marianne is engaged to the butcher Oscar, a match arranged by her father, but one she dreads and hopes to escape through an affair with a charming but shiftless bon vivant named Alfred. In this movement, we are plunged into the promiscuous hullabaloo of the now rather drunken society of bathers. The Sorcerer King makes advances to Alfred's former lover Valerie, the men-experienced owner of a newspaper kiosk. But the Sorcerer King is caught by his nephew, the German law student Eric, who in turn begins an affair with Valerie. Okay, these complications here are starting to make this sound like a Mozart opera where everybody's like after everybody else. Though not before holding target practice in preparation for his fraternity's marksmanship competition. You'll hear shots ringing out from the orchestra representing that. This opens in raucous mode. Brass then take over, playing all sorts of harmonically disconnected, goofy lines. Oh, fun, fun, fun. Gruber likes quick textural changes that contrast, and we get that from a quiet to loud to quiet series just around the 1 minute mark. The waltziness of the movement can be discerned after the second minute. There's something of the carousel or fairground in the way the waltz is played and orchestrated. It dissolves to a glimmering sound at the end of the movement. Track 4 is the third movement, Bengal Fire. This is the recognition scene between Marianne and Alfred. In the music, the Danube continues to flow even as time stands still. Nearby fireworks seal Marianne's engagement and disengagement. The Sorcerer King appears at the wrong moment, the party ends, and Marianne launches into a grand monologue of liberation, asserting the rights of the heart over reason, and breaking with her father. A muted violin tone, full of Viennese vibrato, plays over a set of piano chords. Now that waltzing, vibrato-laden violin tone, I imagine that Viennese people go around with sounds like that in their head throughout their lives. It's so characteristically Viennese. A louder section follows, then past the 2 minute mark, the music gets quiet with the theme and that attractive staccato flute again, adding arabesques. Some quick, loud outbursts disturb the quiet, but the music quickly returns to a quieter dynamic. Meanwhile, a trumpet bursts out with a brash line and the movement suddenly dies down and ends. Track 5, Movement 4, In a Flash. The Danube carries us into Part 2 and Vienna's 8th district. A year has passed, as has Marianne's affair with Alfred, but not before producing an illegitimate child. You really can't have an opera without an illegitimate child. Nobody has children when they're married in operas. Anyway, while a piano student maltreats Johann Strauss's Tales from the Vienna Woods waltz at an open window, Erich, embodiment of the looming Nazi Germany, and the cavalry captain, relic of the vanished Habsburg Empire, come to blows. It's like in The Sound of Music, I guess. Everything here is out of tune. The opening, though, has a bit of a hazy atmosphere with the attractive orchestration. The haze remains throughout the movement as winds and muted brass play various floating themes. Yeah, this sounds like a fun listen. And again, you have a lot of H.K. Gruber's really interesting orchestration of these lines. Things get chaotic in the orchestra leading up to the 3-minute mark, at which point we suddenly hear an incongruous, old-timey piano. A pounding accompanies it to the end, which ends with a thud and repeated piano chord. Track 6, Movement 5, chorale variations on For the Lord Disciplines the One He Loves, and Epilogue. Here, Oscar, the butcher, confides to Valerie that he might yet take Marianne back, if only it weren't for the child, and lends himself to amateurish theological musing, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves, on glowing embers in boiling lead. This has a bubbly accompaniment and rather playful brass over it. I really like the way those lines sort of like break out of their rhythm and just have these little rhythmic flourishes in them and then go back. The violins and winds keep up a staccato, circling arpeggiated pattern as cellos take the theme. The cellos eventually hand off to a new section with a trumpet and trombone over bell-like percussion, gonging like distant church bells. This section sounds a bit unsteady and drunken, and the section ends. Track 7 is the 6th movement, Prayer. Marianne sings a song about the Lord disciplining the one he loves in her ensuing prayer, heard here. The violin represents her voice, and it's a straightforwardly lyrical and impassioned one. There are some pretty cool low contrabassoon rumbles in the subtly played accompaniment. In fact, you heard a little bit of them in that sample. A harp or percussion or combination of these plays a chiming, clock-ticking rhythm in accompaniment. The orchestra swells for a moment underneath and then evaporates, leaving the solo violin playing again over the gently ticking accompaniment. There's one more percussive flourish on what sounds like a xylophone over a bed of strings at the end. And the final movement, track 8, movement 7, Polka Infernale. Marianne has entrusted her newborn son, little Leopold, to Alfred's mother in the Wachau, while she herself ekes out a living as a nude dancer in a nightclub. Her father had never allowed her to learn an honest trade. The Sorcerer King, accompanied by Valerie, Eric, the captain, and other friends, stumbles into that same nightclub on a nocturnal spree and witnesses his daughter's downfall, which only further hardens his soul against Marianne. Can I just say, we need a recording of this opera. I'm really intrigued by this story, and I'd like it with a libretto, please, so I could follow along what's going on. So somebody get on that. Record this entire opera. The Polka Infernale compresses the final scenes of the opera into a time-lapse montage. Oscar attempts to reconcile Valerie with Alfred. Valerie tries to reconcile Marianne with both Alfred and her father. Valerie succeeds, but when the Sorcerer King, together with Marianne, Alfred, Valerie, and Oscar, sets out for the Wachau to see his grandson, it is too late. Little Leopold has just died of pneumonia because Alfred's bigoted grandmother had exposed him to the night air for hours to rid herself of this child of shame. Oh, man. Oscar takes possession of the utterly broken Marianne. What follows is the disconcerting yet rapturous music from the opera's beginning, now revealed in its full meaning, expressing jubilation and horror at once. The old-timey piano opens the movement, sounding broken in its hesitating rhythm. Decadent-sounding strings come in with drunken lines. At 1:10 this abruptly stops, and a trumpet plays a high vibrato-less line, sounding a bit unhinged. At 1:50 a brief, steady rhythm is heard, pushed on by a tuba, but it keeps getting interrupted. And we have to go out on that sound. That was pretty fantastic. Great harmony there. That fantastic harsh wind chord occurs at 2:45. Kind of sounded like a foghorn with some chimes around it. At the end, there's a quiet crescendo to chaotic sounds, and the whole thing thins out into a high wind instrument and a tam-tam roll to end the work. I got to tell you, that was a pretty exhausting suite to listen to, but there's still one more work on the album, and we're going to get to hear Frank Dupree on the piano again. Tracks 9-12, Castles in the Air, piano cycle in 4 movements composed in 1981, so this is an earlier work. For this work, Gruber drew inspiration from Ernest Bloch's The Principle of Hope. The piece was written on commission from Gerhard Grossberger, administrator of Lower Austria's Grafenegg Castle, for the 10th anniversary of the castle concerts there. The premiere was given in 1981 by pianist Kethe Wittlich of the ensemble Die Reihe. Gruber wrote, Grafenegg Castle was only built in the late 19th century and is an imitation on the Tudor style. For me, it's a touching example to the indestructible human drive to rescue curious utopian worlds and ideas into the present. I could say I relate to Gruber's thought here. The work follows the organizational concept of Schoenbergian serial technique. Pianist Frank Dupree remarks, some of the black humor of Gruber's theater work Frankenstein, composed a few years earlier, lives on in this cycle, but also the irony of Till Eulenspiegel-like tricks of MOB art godfather Erik Satie. Now, MOB art, or mob art, refers to an avant-garde music ensemble and artistic movement co-founded by H.K. Gruber in 1968. Their music was playful yet subversive, and I guess along Satie lines, he was a pretty subversive composer himself. Track 9, the first movement, Out of Sight. Every self-respecting castle naturally keeps a princess imprisoned, and that's what's out of sight here. This sounds like it starts with the highest and lowest notes on the piano, or somewhere close. From there, light, mysterious, floating harmonies drift by. Just after the 1-minute mark, a more mobile set of counter-melodic lines comes in and raises the tempo. Textures constantly change, and no one line really defines the movement. The movement sort of goes by like a set of variations without a theme. Let's just pick a random part. From this point, the music reaches a high energy point and scurries on until the 4-minute and 50-second mark, when chord patterns slow it down and alter the mood yet again. At 5 minutes and 40 seconds, a rather catchy dancing rhythm emerges and keeps its basic profile to just before the ending chords. Track 10, the second movement, with Princess. Grafeneg's Princess is locked in 4/4 time, which her 12/16 character can't quite get used to. This movement is briefer than the first and starts with modal single lines reaching out in the right hand. There are occasional bass notes to suggest harmonic underpinning. The counter-melodic quality of the beginning becomes part of the movement's fingerprint. Okay. Track 11, the third movement, Mechanic. The music box on the mantelpiece in the stateroom plays mechanically, but unfortunately its spring has a crack, triggering cascades of notes uncontrollably. The movement starts with a cheerful sort of rhythmic pattern, but there's a hiccup in it, sort of like a gear slipping. Eventually, that gear slip results in the cascades of notes mentioned, played from the high end of the keyboard downward. Now we heard a few of them in that sample. The movement ends inconclusively, still unwinding until it's cut off. And track 12, the fourth movement, Dreamed Today, refers to the castle's ghost, who dreams of something large, perhaps of a larger castle. I rather like the opening of this, with its melody venturing outward but then taking a sudden turn. sounds like a very rhythmically tricky movement to play. But of course, we're in great hands with Frank Dupree, as we know from previous recordings. To me, this movement comes across as cute. Rhythmic patterns get denser as the piece goes on. The piano winds up in its high end where it sprinkles out some patterns. I like the sudden extensions added to the lines in this work. The piece ends appealingly in the high end of the piano. H.K. Gruber's approach to the way he combines his harmony and orchestration is unique to him. His music has its own distinct fingerprint, evident in all three of these works. He's quirky in the way he lays everything out, with melodies and figures that can suddenly turn in on themselves, or suddenly take off at faster speed, or swerve in a different direction, or suddenly change rhythm, and lines rarely rhythmically interlock, or if they do, not for long. The orchestration is pretty interesting. Rather than layers of sound, these works will have a quirky line highlighted by a solo instrument going its own way while there's a melody being harmonized. The piano concerto and short stories from the Vienna Woods both have this quality. Both are orchestrated similarly, with the addition of Frank Dupree's solo piano in the piano concerto adding yet another quality. The piano doesn't ever really step out of the score, despite all the virtuosity at the end, but rather seems to play the role of that quirky individual doing his own thing, or maybe occasionally commenting on the orchestra's doings. Castles in the Air was a charming work with mechanical rhythms and plenty of quality time spent in the higher end of the piano, particularly in the last movement. Frank Dupree brings this work to charming life. Dupree is a man of many musical masks, a pianist who is convincing with jazz rhythms, as we heard in his recordings of Kapustin's piano concertos, and equally at home in Gruber's more abstract, often teasing sound world. This was an interesting album to discover, and Dupree's playing brings the tracks he's on to vivid life.
It's really hard to put Gruber's music or my reaction to it into words.
I know what you mean.
When I was listening to the piano concerto, I wrote down everything but the kitchen sink in my notes.
It does have that quality.
I was trying to get used to all of these things. And that pretty much continues through the next work. There's never a dull moment, and new ideas constantly come along like a stream of consciousness. I think you have to listen to this many times to develop some sort of expectation for the flow of the music. The short stories from the Vienna Woods is episodic, and it makes you wonder about the convoluted opera storyline that you gave us some snippets from.
Yeah, convoluted opera storyline, also known as opera storyline.
Yeah. This one sounds particularly dramatic. It would be interesting to hear a performance of that. And as you said, we would definitely need the libretto.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this music highlights those developments in interesting ways. Well, the orchestration and the timbral combinations of Gruber are really unique and surprising throughout. They're really quite creative. And he constantly finds new combinations of sounds as he goes along. Frank Dupree seems to be the perfect pianist to put across these ideas in both the concerto and in the Castles in the Air work. He's really impressive, and his technique seems to have no limits, really, as we've heard him in the Kapustin and now here. I can't imagine what the score for the concerto looks like. It must be frightening. I found Castles in the Air interesting in its independent lines for both hands. It's constantly changing ideas. It requires extreme coordination, and I was really impressed by Frank Dupree's playing on this work as well. Yeah, this is a composer that would take me a lot more time to feel comfortable with really understanding his sort of concept, but I found it intriguing all the way through.
Yeah, listening to him is a bit like reading a book like Ulysses by James Joyce and just not being able to cram it all into your head right away. It seems like it would take a lot of time to absorb all of this that's going on. It's really, complex, but it's all pretty intriguing, and it's got like kind of a sort of lightness and a teasingness and a quirkiness to it that's really appealing.
It may be really fitting for our modern society. I think people's minds are used to constant ideas and information flow. And, this music may be just fitting for the way our brains have developed these days.
Could be.
Okay, over to the jazz side. We're going to start out with another organ recording. So I had to separate this a little bit from our episode 2 weeks ago, where we had 3 organ-based recordings. But this was the one I was really planning to get to, although I was waiting on the release date. And it finally came out on February 20th. and that's Pat Bianchi's Confluence. This is a self-release by him. Pat Bianchi was born in 1975 in Rochester, New York. He started playing the organ at the age of 7. He studied at the Berklee College of Music. He spent some years in Denver, and then he came to New York City in 2008. He's an associate professor of jazz organ at the Berklee College of Music, and he's been a sideman on more than 35 recordings with names like Ed Cherry, Pat Martino, Tim Warfield, and this is his 10th recording as a leader. Back in episode 39, Organic High, from November of 2021, we talked about his Something to Say, the music of Stevie Wonder recording. That was on the Savant label. In episode 76, Essential Organs, from August of 2022, we heard Working It Out. That was on 21H Records, an organ trio recording. And this recording has the same lineup that he had on his 2023 recording 3, although we didn't discuss that one. On this recording, Pat Bianchi on the organ and other keyboards, Troy Roberts on tenor saxophone. He's originally from Perth, Australia, and has played with Joey DeFrancesco, Jeff Tain Watts, James Morrison, and Van Morrison. And we've got Colin Stranahan on drums, a Colorado native. And by the way, Pat Bianchi is also on a new recording that just came out on Friday called Meantime, a trio led by drummer Adam Osmiansky with guitarist Dan Wilson. So if you need even more organ, you can go listen to that one too.
And who doesn't need that?
I do.
He's a busy man.
This was recorded on June 10th of 2025 at Trading 8's studio in Paramus, New Jersey, recorded by Chris Sullett, mixed and mastered by Pat Bianchi himself. Recording gets going with It Was a Very Good Year by Irvin Drake. This was first recorded by the Kingston Trio in 1961, and everyone knows Frank Sinatra's 1965 version. The music, combined with the lyrics on Sinatra's version, is a nostalgic, somewhat bittersweet look back at an aging man's life. But here the mood is more menacing. There's a 16-measure intro that builds up from phasery electric piano keyboards with the others adding in. Nice drum fills from Stranahan there, and Bianchi gets the melody going on the organ. When the intro idea comes back in for backing, it takes on an ominous mood. Let's hear this one get started. That deep organ bass. Roberts takes the second verse on the sax, and Bianchi's organ solo on this tune is insanely good, so let's hear some of it. Roberts is really on fire here too with some gutsy, soulful playing, so this tune is going to get a rare third sample. Let's hear the angsty end of his solo. Sounds like there's a little kind of harmonic effect on the end there, which we'll hear more of later. Roberts is back with another verse to huge unison lines with Bianchi to the end. It's an interesting choice of a tune in a really transformative arrangement and performance. Track 2, Jitterbug Waltz, an old tune from Fats Waller, 1942. But don't get out your dance shoes yet, not unless you can waltz in 7/8 time, which is how they've got this arranged. Roberts takes the fun melody, the others dropping out under his syncopated phrase. It's a lot of fun, so let's check this one out. Drumming from Stranahan, too. Roberts solos first, keeping connected smooth lines over the popping drums and organ bass lines. It chills out for the start of Bianchi's solo that has playfully meandering lines that build in intensity. Let's hear the speedy climax into the new composed unison section that connects back to the melody. Was a double espresso solo if I've ever heard one before. Back to the melody from there, and Stranahan gets some hard-hitting drums over a vamping section to the end. Track 3, Jazz Standard Time, Guess I'll Hang My Tears Out to Dry, Jules Stein and Sammy Kahn, 1944. It's a ballad, and Bianchi makes a great intro to this standard with an AABA form with lush organ tones. Roberts is soft and breathy on the melody. Bianchi solos first, working to a swelled climax and bringing it down sweetly. Robert starts out reserved, but things get a happy skip and Bianchi swells the energy on the B section. I was going to sample that, but I always like to get an ending sample in somewhere. So let's check out Roberts' cadenza, ending with some great organ sounds to finish. Track 4, another jazz standard, The Song Is You, Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein. From the Broadway musical Music in the Air, 1932, this gets an energetic double-time feel with a really exciting arrangement. Robert starts it out. Bianchi has really cool syncopated chord hits on the repeat of the A section and a killer break into the B, and another one at the end of the melody launching into a solo. Let's check it out. Bianchi and Roberts both have exciting solos, with Stranahan really driving the swing on the drums. Again, there's a section with some effect on the sax. Let's check out the trading with Stranahan after the sax solo. Wow, that was a lot of fun. Track 5 is Dizzy's Dilemma. Now I'm a little confused here because I know of this tune as one by Charlie Shavers going way back to 1945, but honestly, this doesn't sound anything like that tune. Here, there's a funkified 20-measure idea with a jagged unison sax line into an 8-measure section. It goes around twice into a solo from Roberts. Bianchi has an electric piano solo on this one that we can check out. Roberts' backing notes with effects sound a bit like duck quacks. Finishes up with one more time through the melody line to a sudden ending. Track 6, Come Rain or Come Shine, a tune by Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer from 1946, written for the Broadway musical St. Louis Woman. Another classic standard tune. It's a 32-measure melody with halves that start off the same but get a harmonic jump in the second half. Roberts starts it, and he and Bianchi trade off sections. Nice brushwork from Stranahan, and don't miss Bianchi's cool bass fill on this one. Break, and with that shimmering organ tone, I think we want to hear some more, so let's jump in a little bit further on down the road. Roberts sounds suave and smooth on his solo here, with a passionate cry too. He gets some final improvisations after the ending melody section as well. And the recording ends up with track 7, John Coltrane's Wise One from his 1964 Crescent recording. This sounds great with rubato sax melody lines and huge organ swells at the opening. Let's take a listen. Continues in similar fashion until Bianchi and Stranahan set a relaxed groove, and Roberts gets lots of time for a passionate solo. Let's hear some of his playing on this one. Bianchi's organ solo has some synth layering behind it for extra atmosphere. His lines zip and zag into bluesy ideas and shimmering chords. Roberts is back for a final rubato melody section to a sustained ending. On Confluence, Pat Bianchi shows off his mastery of the Hammond organ, not only with an impressive technique and tonal palette, but with a commanding presence of sound. The organ sounds huge on this recording, and it makes you forget that you're listening to just a trio. The tunes are mostly familiar jazz standards, but they're reimagined creatively, from the ominous "It Was a Very Good Year" to the tricky 7/4 rendering of Jitterbug Waltz. Troy Roberts' tenor sax playing is a good match, showing a lot of versatility from suave and smooth swinging lines to gutsy and edgy tone and outside playing, fitting the mood with what's called for. He and Bianchi seem to feed each other with energy for enthusiastic solos by both players straight through the recording. And Colin Stranahan's drumming is flexible and impactful with a lot of different feels. His fills and solo sections catch your ear and impress with detail. This recording kept me engaged from start to finish.
Yeah, this was a pretty happening album, and it only took 3 guys to make all that sound. It's pretty amazing. Now, you mentioned at the beginning It Was a Very Good Year has an ominous sound. That's not the way I think of that track, so It was really interesting to me. What are they saying about this year? What happened? I'm really curious to know in words, but we got the music, so we know it was ominous. Pat Bianchi is clearly the standout here. He's got so many great sounds on the organ, and he's right up front. He shows all sorts of technique and expertise with his organ sound, playing some Fender Rhodes at points as well. Is that a Fender Rhodes?
Not sure.
Or something that sounds like a Fender Rhodes anyway. He brings more moods to these 7 tracks than you normally get on an album featuring Hammond organ, and even gets psychedelic at the beginning. It Was a Very Good Year. Not sounding at all like the sentimental Frank Sinatra track, but much bolder in this interpretation. Troy Roberts has the theme on that and plays it full out. He's by turns soulful and intimate, often both at the same time, and provides the heart of the album to Pat Bianchi's soul. What gets the body moving is Bianchi's bass and Colin Stranahan's drums. Stranahan doesn't step out much, but it's rather modest when he does. He also provides a funky rhythm on Dizzy's Dilemma. If you love the sound of the Hammond organ in all its varieties, this album's for you, and it's certainly for me.
Yeah.
You hear all of those varieties in Bianchi's playing, really solid all the way through, and even surprising at points.
Yeah, we listen to a lot of organ recordings on adult music, and Pat Bianchi's definitely one of my favorite players.
Yeah, what a great instrument, too. Boy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, next, let's move on to another instrument we like a lot, the vibraphone, with Arturo Serra's Evening Light on Fresh Sound Records. This came out February 27th. Born in Valencia, Spain, Serra studied percussion and classical music at the Conservatory of Valencia. He started playing jazz as part of the big band Sedavi in Valencia. He's worked with musicians such as Jerry Bergonzi, Dave Santoro, Dick Oates, and Joe Magnarelli. He leads his own groups in different formations, quartet, quintet, and sextet. At present, he is a professor at the Malaga Philharmonic Orchestra. Back in episode 161, Music Mixology from April of 2024, we talked about Dark Side, Light Side, his recording with a quintet on New Steps Records. In the Fresh Sounds homepage information about this recording, Serra explains that the isolation of the pandemic gave him time to focus on writing original material, which he hadn't done in some time, instead focusing on playing and recording jazz standards. After the pandemic, he started working with new musicians, and after a small tour, he brought out his new tunes, and that led to an opportunity to record with these players. It's a completely different lineup than the previous recording. So on this recording, Arturo Serra on vibes and all compositions except track 9, which you'll know when we get to. Perico Sambit on sax, who Serra collaborated with in his first sextet back in 1991, which became his first album as a leader called Confidential. That also featured original compositions. We've got Albert Palau on piano, Daniel Frank on bass, and Martin Anderson on drums. This was recorded at Jazz Tone Studios, Valencia, in October of 2024, engineered by Sebastian Laverde, mixed and mastered by Fernando J. Romero at FJR Studios in Granada in December of 2024. It's produced by Arturo Serra and executive producer Jordi Pujol. The recording gets started with a tune called Density. This gets going with an 8-measure intro with a chord cycle on piano that will become a bass for some of the melody progression. The melody is 40 measures taken in unison on sax and vibes. It's a medium tempo here and switches between a light Latin and swing feel that gets some push in the sections where the bass switches up to walking. Let's hear this recording get started. Serra is up first for a solo, so let's come back in and hear some of his improvisations. Yeah, nice melodic ideas, and I like how he really lets notes ring out. Sambeat follows with a solo that he phrases skillfully, mixing spaces and double-time lines. Palau gets a piano solo too, and Serra lays out to let his left hand take over the chords. Vibes in piano can sometimes crowd the same musical space, but they've got that worked out nicely here. And the final melody section is shorter and works to a series of holds. Track 2 is Nema Eyes. This has a Latin beat feel and an 8-measure introduction that sets the mood with a bass and left-hand piano ostinato figure. The melody is worked together by sax and vibes. There's a 16-measure repeating phrase where Sambeat gets to add in improvised lines, and then a final 8-measure section. If you know John Coltrane's Nema, you'll hear the inspiration in the melody. Let's check it out. Sambeat is up for a solo on this one first, so let's hear some of his playing here. Nice feeling there. Serra follows with a vibes solo. I like how things flow into swing sections that gives a sense of breathing between the different feels of rhythm. Palau has a piano solo on this one too before they go through the melody again. Track 3 is Sosiego, which I think means tranquility in Spanish. Matching the title, the opening section is rubato with flowing sax lines from Sambeat, ringing vibes from Serra, and rippling piano lines. It gets a slow and steady ballad tempo for Sambeat to take the melody, which seems to be 20 measures. Let's hear the opening into the start of the melody. Serra solos first on this one with sensitive and light melodic lines, and Palau matches the mood with a light touch on his piano solo. Let's check out some of his playing on this tune. Ensemble it follows with improvisations connecting to a short final melody section and a soft ending. Track 4 is something more real. This one has a bossa kind of feel to it, but with snappy bass from Daniel Frank starting on the 8-measure intro. The unison vibes and sax melody is a repeating 20-measure idea with a dreamy mood and lifting phrases. Serra solos first, he has some tricky rhythmic lines that always keep a melodic sense, so let's hear some more of his playing. Follows next with a piano solo that has playful rhythmic ideas and running lines. Sambi digs in with some cool riffs to get his solo started and phrases with a lot of feeling that work into the lower register. The ending melody works to a slower ending sooner than expected on the repeat. Track 5, Kintsugi. This is a Japanese word, not Spanish here, which is the art of repairing broken pottery by mending the broken areas with lacquer that's dusted or mixed with powdered gold or other precious metals. This starts with a repeating 6-measure section with smooth sax and vibes lines over busy bass and piano left-hand lines. Next is a 32-measure melody section with interesting harmonic twists. The change-ups in Frank's bass playing from snappy ideas to a chugging walk catch your ear on the way. Let's check it out. solos first on this one, followed by Sambeat and Serra. Frank gets a bass solo on this one, so let's hear some of his bass playing. And after another time through the melody, they keep on vamping for some more improvisations from Sambeat before the ending. Track 6 is Evening Light, the title track. On the intro for this one, Frank has a samba-like pulse in his bass, but the bass and left-hand piano parts change up in interesting ways under the sax and vibes melody. It has a repeating 20 measures section and then a final 8 measures. Sambeat is on soprano sax for this one. The lines have a feeling of reaching for something. Serra solos first on this one. Let's check out some of Sambeat's soprano sax sound on his solo. Has a piano solo on this one too, and Sambeat has some more improvisations before the ending. Track 7 is Evading Predators. This one's in 3/4 time with an easy flowing rhythm and nice fills from Martin Anderson's drums. It has an airy feel with modal harmonies. Sambeat is on soprano sax here too. Serra, Sambeat, and Frank all have solos on this one. For the sake of time, I'll leave you to check them out on your own. Track 8 is Shirley. This is a very pretty ballad in an AABA shape. The final section has an extra 4 measures. Serra takes the melody from the start and hands it off to Sambeat for the middle section, which is about as far as we can get at this tempo in a 1-minute sample. Into the next section there. Palau has a gentle piano solo first. Let's check out some of his light touch on this tune. Lovely playing with a nice sense of space. Sambeat is next for solo section 2, and Serra is back for the final segment of the melody to a lush ending. Track 9 is the only non-original by Serra. Here it's Miles Davis's 4 from working with the Miles Davis Quintet, recorded in 1956 and released in 1960. All jazz fans know this tune. They've reimagined it here with a neat new intro that uses the opening lick idea into bass and left-hand piano lines and drum fills. The melody and harmony get a little new flavor too. Let's hear it into the break and start of Serra's Vibes solo. Sambeat has an intense alto solo, and Palau has a piano solo on this one too. I'll leave you to check them out. And we'll move on to the final track, track 10, Infranganti. A minor mood and fast tempo for this one. There's a 16-measure intro and a repeating 16-measure sax and vibes melody. Really fine bass work underneath by Frank. Let's check it out. Serra is off on a solo, followed by Sambeat, and after that they do some trading with Anderson, and we haven't heard him get a real solo spot yet, so let's check that out. Back to the melody from there to finish up the recording. Last time we heard Arturo Serra, it was a recording covering originals by other jazz musicians, and this time we're treated to a program of his own compositions with one classic from Miles Davis. Serra has a great melodic sense for both his writing and his improvisations, so it's a comfortable listen right from the start. His tunes have a lot of variety of meters and rhythmic feel, from hard swinging, Latin-y beats, and change-ups in between to some more ballad-like themes too. His improvisations have fine phrasing and fun rhythmic ideas too. Perico Sambeat shares the lead here with nice work on both alto and soprano sax. His solos are passionate and varied in expression. Albert Palau works with Serra well, never getting in the way of each other when backing, and his piano solos show sensitive and exciting aspects. Daniel Frank's bass playing really drives the tunes, and he catches your ear underneath everything with a couple solo spots too. And Martin Anderson's drums have a lot of finesse with cymbals that catch your attention, tasty fills, and some speedy stick work that we heard in the last sample. It's a fine recording of original music, just waiting for you to have an enjoyable listen to.
Yeah, this album had a laid-back vibe all the way up to the last two tracks where it suddenly takes off rhythmically. So it's for a relaxing time, maybe an evening after work with a bourbon, but it's going to wake you up in the end. The secret weapon here is Perico Sambeat on sax. He's a subtle player, connects phrases with understated and attractive results. I like the way he smoothly got back into the theme on Sosiego and smoothly goes into the solo in Naima Eyes without you really noticing it. He's a crafty player. Albert Palau on piano is an explorer looking for ways to expand, and I liked his slow burn of a groove in the solo for Kintsugi. And I also liked the way he took Sambeat's solo ending for his opening phrase on Evening Light. Just things like that, just little charming things that stick out on the album. Those kind of things bring real pleasure to the ears and mind, and we had to wait to the end to hear a stylish drum solo, words I never thought I'd say together, from Martin Anderson. You don't really think of the drums as being stylish, but I thought that drum solo had a lot of style to it, or stylishness, I guess. He's got a light touch, and that's why I think I thought of it as stylish.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I want to say about this album. It's full of light touches and classy all the way through.
And those vibes really lift the spirit here.
I didn't even mention them. Boy, what's wrong with me? Oh boy, no, because I was just so like enamored by the class of the playing and stuff. But of course, like Serra's vibes are just fantastic all the way through.
Can't wait to hear what he does next. All right, one more recording. Do it, Mike.
All right, I'm doing it now.
Yeah. On the Notes Around
Somebody
label.
stop me.
This is from a pianist we really like, Antonio Faraò, and trumpeter Stéphane Belmondo. This came out February 27th. Born in Rome in 1965, Antonio Faraò earned a degree in 1983 from the Giuseppe Verdi Conservatory in Milan, and he performed in clubs as a teenager. His debut, Black Inside, in 1999 was recorded with Ira Coleman and Jeff Tain Watts. He's worked with musicians like Bob Berg, Andre Ceccarelli, Jack DeJohnette, Joe Lovano, among others, and he's got more than a dozen recordings as a leader. Back in episode 170, Muses, Moods, and an Oud from June of 2024, we discussed tributes on Crisscross Jazz by Antonio Faraò, and that was in a trio with John Patitucci. That made our favorites list of 2024, and his recent recording, Kind of Piano Solo, is really outstanding too. I would have picked it for an episode, but there was a few months gap between the physical release in September of last year and streaming, where it came out in January of this year. Anyway, I highly recommend that recording as well. And we heard the Belmondo Quintet with brothers Stéphane on trumpet and Lionel Belmondo on saxophone way back in episode 7 in 2021.
Episode 7?
Yeah.
Did we do an episode 7? Boy.
And their album Brotherhood. Stéphane Belmondo is a top jazz trumpeter born in 1967 with a discography that goes all the way back to the late 1980s as a sideman and more than 15 recordings as a leader or co-leader. There's no official release information with credits for the recording either on Faraò's homepage, Bandcamp, or from the record label, so I'll be basing my information for this all from what I could gather from various music distribution sites and a few discussions of the recording online. The lineup here is Stéphane Belmondo on trumpet and flugelhorn, Antonio Faraò on piano, Thomas Bremery on bass, Benjamin Hennock on drums, and this was recorded in October of 2025, the sound engineer Carlo Contini. The recording gets underway with a tune called Otti, which I believe is an original by Bremery. And this one gets going with ascending trumpet phrases from Belmondo. They're like 5 measures plus 2 beats ending in drum fills and then walking bass that creates a kind of want to get started feel, but it keeps resetting. And then Faraò is off on an energetic solo. Let's hear this recording get started. When Antonio Faraò plays, I always want to listen because he's got amazing ideas and he never runs out here. So let's come back in and hear some more of his playing on this solo. Belmondo follows with a trumpet solo. Everyone drops out for a bass solo from Brameri, and it wraps up with another time through the quirky melody section. You can see the studio recording video for this one on Faraò's YouTube channel. Track 2 is an Antonio Faraò original, Remembering Duke. Brameri gets a bass ostinato going on the 8-measure intro here. The simple and calming melody has two main sections. The first is 24 measures with repeating phrases worked by piano and trumpet together, and the next is 12 measures with more harmonic movement. Belmondo carries on with some improvisations into a little interlude before the structure repeats. Getting into that second section there, Faraò has a gentle and contemplative solo on this one. Let's hear Belmondo play on this tune. And back to another time through the melody sections from there with a fading ending of improvisations from Belmondo. Track 3 is a Faraò composition, Around. This is a short one at less than 3 minutes, likely born out of some free playing. Faraò gets a bass line going for 4 measures that Brameri picks up for another 8. Belmondo and Faraò work a simple melody line together for about 20 measures that leads to improvised dialogue. Let's check it out. After their exchanges, they join back up on the melody line before things dissolve at the end. Track 4 is a Belmondo composition, My Little Dancer. Faraò gives this a pretty rubato solo piano intro. Belmondo plays his melody, a gentle 24-measure idea with some nice harmonic twists over a light R&B style groove. Let's hear it get started. Faraò has a solo on this one with lots of ideas, a bit of gospel touch into speedy flowing lines. Since it's Belmondo's tune, let's hear his playing on it, and it sounds like he's on flugelhorn for this one. Bremer has a fine bass solo too, with melodic ideas that sing out into the higher register, and Belmondo returns for another time through the melody. Track 5 is Herbie Hancock's One Finger Snap from the 1964 album Empyrean Isles. On the original, it was Freddie Hubbard. Here, after Faraò gets it started, Belmondo joins in and is off on improvisations ASAP. Faraò has a dazzling piano solo with some great synced-up two-hand ideas, and Benjamin Hennock gets his drum feature here, so let's hear his playing. And that's it. Track 6 is a Belmondo original, Joey's Smile. Bremer gets this going with a heartbeat like bass. Belmondo's ballad melody is 19 measures long, sounds like flugelhorn here too, and he continues on for another time around for a solo. Faraò takes a round for an improvised solo on this one too, and then Belmondo's back for another time through the melody and some final soft improvisations. I'll leave you to check out the solos on this one on your own. Track 7, Do It, the title track by Antonio Faraò. This one chugs along with an acrobatic melody line into left-hand piano and bass figures in a repeating 18-measure idea, and then Faraò is off improvising. I just want to hear some more of this solo, so let's come back in a little bit further on. And Belmondo follows with an adventurous solo, linking back up to the melody, after which they vamp out for Hennick to get some drum time, building up energy to the end. Track 8 is a Stéphane Belmondo composition, Melancholy of Rita, and he's recorded this previously on an album he made with the late guitarist Sylvain Luc called 2.0 that was released in 2019. It's like a ballad at the start with a dreamy intro from Faraò. Let's start a little ways in where Belmondo starts the rubato melody. And it gets a rock-like beat from there. Belmondo continues on into improvisations, followed by Faraò, who digs in rhythmically on his solo here, working in cascading phrases. Bremery has a bass solo on this one, so it's time to check out some of his playing. Back to the melody from there. It fades out over improvised exchanges from Belmondo and Faraò. And the recording finishes up with a tune by Antonio Faraò, Sweet. Sweet it is, a gentle ballad tune done just as a duet by Faraò and Belmondo. After a short piano intro, the melody is a 19-measure idea. They go around twice. It sounds like the 12th measure is only 2 beats, so it kind of moves the phrase ahead unexpectedly. They go around it twice. Let's hear the first time. And let's hear Belmondo's improvised solo on this one. Some magical piano starting there from Antonio Faraò. After his solo, they take it around the melody once more with a little extension of soft lines from Belmondo. And that's the recording. The overall mood here is one of relaxed spontaneity. It sounds like old friends getting together to make music without a worry of how it will work out. The program of mostly original compositions from Faraò and Belmondo has a good variety, from sensitive ballads to more sketchy constructions that invite launching into adventurous improvisations. They both take chances in their solos, making an enjoyable listen, knowing they'll land on their feet. Belmondo keeps a lyrical sense even when he's in a speedier gear, and Faraò always surprises you with his impressive technique and imaginative ideas to match. Thomas Brommery makes versatile bass grooves throughout, and his solos are especially melodic for a bassist. And Benjamin Hennick drives the swing and more even beat tunes with confidence and a couple of solo spots to show off his stuff. Faraò and Belmondo's musical personalities combine for a shared enjoyment with the listener.
Yeah, in fact, that Antonio Faraò virtuosity comes out right away. You notice that all through the album. He's really amazing. Yeah, he brings some serious virtuosity to his playing, both via technique and to the way he'll chop up phrases and turn in on them before expanding further. He's got like a really unique sort of approach. There's a kind of tightness to the way he phrases in solos that's rather unique. A lot of complexity enters into what he plays. Stéphane Belmondo sticks to a more melodic approach on the flugelhorn, though he displays some virtuosity on the instrument at times as well, applying trumpet-like speed to his heavier-sounding instrument and including to the trumpet as well. It's all very impressive. Benjamin Hennick is a hard-hitting drummer, reminding me a bit of Rudy Royston.
Oh, yeah. And
that could partly be because the drums sound really compressed. I think they had to, tame him sort of in the studio with the sound. It's a good sound overall, and I guess the impact had to be evened out, but I feel like I like feeling the impact on the drums. It doesn't really bother me if they're really being hit hard. The sound here sort of blunts the impact, but, I mean, it sounds good, but I want to feel it, too. Excellent playing, though. The music itself tends to have a mid-tempo flow with a few ballads, and the individual playing on the album is fantastic, and that's really what drew me to it. And that includes Benjamin Hennock, of course. I love hard-hitting drummers like that.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear anything from Antonio Faraò, and with this group of musicians, there's a lot of interplay and spontaneity. All right, that's going to wrap things up for episode 250. As we said at the beginning, we're going to take a week off after episode 251, but we've got a menu lined up for next week already. Let us know what's on the classical side of the buffet, Mike.
The buffet. All right, we have an album called After Dark, a Midnight Fantasia, or Fantasia, if you want to say it that way. This features Pierre Gallon on the harpsichord and several other types of keyboards, including a virginal and a toy piano.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is on the Harmonia Mundi label. It's a program of Renaissance era music, not Baroque, so it's pretty early. So we get some Renaissance keyboard, whereas today we had Renaissance vocals.
Right.
The second album is an album called Cocteau by Isabelle O'Connell on the piano, and Cocteau refers to Jean Cocteau, and it's an album of piano music by composers that were associated with Jean Cocteau, the artist, painter, and filmmaker. And, of course, it's all music we really love. Eric Satie, Igor Stravinsky, just the modernists from the early 20th century. See, he kept company with very cool people. And for our contemporary composer, a record I've been sitting on for too long, Eun Suk Chin. She's a Korean composer, and this is just an album of her ensemble works. We don't have enough of these. We got to get more recordings for music by Eun Suk Chin. This is by Ensemble Intercontemporain and Pierre Blues, and that's on the Alpha label. And I'm looking forward to hearing that, actually. It should be a bit challenging, though. I'll warn you in advance.
Okay. I'm up for it. On the jazz half of the program, we've got a lot of variety. We're going to start out with a debut recording from a drummer from the Vancouver jazz scene, Arvind Ramdas. It's called Here We Go on Cellar Music. That came out just this Friday, as all three of these recordings did. Then we're going to check out a Spanish guitarist, Juan Fort, with his recording Hanging In on 45 Jazz. And finally, we've got a new one from Brian Lynch, one of our favorite trumpet players and exciting composers. And that's called Torchbearers on his own label, Holistic Music Works. And that's got a couple of tunes with Samara Joy on vocals as well.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So all those classical and jazz recordings will be up on our Deezer playlist. I also have a link to it from our Facebook page. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Any final thoughts, Mike?
I'll just wish I could be hanging out in the Vienna woods in warmer weather, I should say.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Starting to get a little cold again this week here, but spring's on its way.
Yeah, we had a cold day today.
With lots of new releases. So we'll be back again next week with all of this new music. And until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.